Russia has issued what many see as a second, chilling warning to NATO. After Russia's Oreshnik missile barrage battered Kyiv's defenses, Vladimir Putin is now seen as issuing a far more direct threat to US. The message from Moscow is blunt: reduce US troop numbers in Europe or face unspecified countermeasures.
This would not only inevitably necessitate the forced adoption of military technical measures necessary to ensure the security of the Russian Federation, but would also result in a significant escalation of tensions throughout Europe.
An increasingly unprepared Europe now risks being caught in the deadly crossfire between the United States and Russia. European governments remain adamant about keeping their diplomatic missions in Kyiv, a stance that could create double trouble for NATO. Tensions have soared between Russia and NATO's leading power, the United States, over the presence and possible expansion of American troops in Eastern Europe. Moscow has warned that deploying additional US forces near Russia's borders would be unacceptable, framing such a move as a direct threat to its security. These remarks were delivered by Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova on May 28, giving them the weight of an official government position.
The prospect of relocating US military bases and contingents, as we suspect, from Central and Eastern European countries considered less trustworthy to those considered more trustworthy by the United States, including Poland, literally within striking distance of our country's western borders, is unacceptable. This would not only inevitably necessitate the forced adoption of military technical measures necessary to ensure the security of the Russian Federation, but would also result in a significant escalation of tensions throughout Europe, especially given the increasingly provocative stance of the United States' European satellites toward the Russian Federation.
Zakharova also argued that reducing US military personnel in Europe would be a rational, justified, long overdue step towards lowering tensions. She claimed that pulling back American forces would help stabilize what she described as an imbalanced security situation created by NATO's actions. By contrast, she warned that deploying more troops would place them literally within striking distance of Russia's borders, increasing the risk of confrontation. Roughly 80,000 US soldiers are currently deployed across Europe, with around 10,000 stationed in Poland alone as part of NATO's forward posture. Poland shares a border with Russia's heavily militarized Kaliningrad exclave, making any troop buildup there especially sensitive. Russia's latest warning coincided with Trump unveiling plans to send an extra 5,000 American troops to Poland, a move Moscow sees as directly provocative. Despite political infighting, NATO has been steadily ramping up its defenses, preparing for the possibility of a Russian attack somewhere along the alliance's eastern flank. A Danish intelligence report in 2025 warned that Russia could be in a position to attack parts of Europe within the next 5 years, further fueling alarm. However, Vladimir Putin has repeatedly insisted that Moscow has no intention of striking NATO, unless Russia itself is attacked first. Russian officials have long accused the West of reckless militarization, arguing that NATO is pushing forces and weapons too close to their borders. They often cite NATO's eastward expansion, right up to Russia's near abroad, as one of the underlying causes of the war in Ukraine. A top Putin aide threatened European leaders after they ignored Russia's latest warning surrounding escalating tensions linked to Kyiv recently. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev mocked European governments publicly during a sharply worded post shared online through social media. Medvedev criticized the European Union for continuing diplomatic operations inside Ukraine's capital despite mounting Russian military threats recently nationwide. The remarks followed Moscow's warning urging foreigners to leave Kyiv before possible systematic strikes targeting the Ukrainian capital unfold. Dmitry Medvedev said, and I quote, "The EU has said it will maintain its diplomatic presence in Kyiv unchanged, despite Russia's warnings. Well, apparently they've got diplomats to spare and need to trim the headcount." Unquote. Russia increased pressure on Europe by signaling possible escalation connected to continuing attacks and rising tensions surrounding the ongoing conflict. Despite Moscow's warnings, the European Union announced it would maintain diplomatic missions and personnel inside Kyiv without any reductions. Anua Elenouni said, and I quote, "We will not change our position or presence in Kyiv. Russian attacks, unfortunately, are daily reality both in Kyiv and in other parts of Ukraine. Russia is once again trying to cynically shift the blame for its own aggression, Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine, onto Ukraine, unquote. Russia earlier accused European leaders of allowing Ukraine complete freedom despite escalating attacks and growing regional instability recently nationwide. European officials dismissed Moscow's warnings as intimidation tactics designed primarily to spread fear and pressure Western governments politically afterward. The escalating rhetoric fueled fears that Russia could intensify military strikes against Kyiv during the already volatile conflict phase anytime. A Russian foreign ministry official made the remarks in comments carried by the Izvestia newspaper, according to TASS. Oreshnik said Europe was deliberately ignoring what Moscow described as Ukraine's violations of international and humanitarian law. Oreshnik said, and I quote, "This, war crimes, is one of the important issues that will undoubtedly arise on the negotiation track. The question here is whether international humanitarian law in the form of the Geneva Conventions, additional protocols, and a whole list of conventions should be swept under the rug, or whether international humanitarian law is binding on everyone. If it is binding on everyone, then Europe will have to admit that Kyiv committed such crimes." Unquote. EU leaders condemned Russia's latest strikes but did not mention the reported attack on the dormitory in Starobelsk. Russian authorities said 21 people were killed and another 60 were injured in Starobelsk. Moscow said most of those killed in the dormitory strike were teenage girls. Russian officials said Ukrainian drones hit the main college building and dormitory in 3 waves. Russia later launched what it described as a massive retaliatory strike on Ukraine. Moscow said the attack involved Oreshnik, Iskander, Kinshal, and Zircon missile systems. The Russian Defense Ministry said command posts, air bases, and defense plants were hit. Ursula von der Leyen accused Moscow of brutality and of showing disregard for human life. Kaja Kallas described Russia's actions as a political scare tactic after the strikes. Macron vowed to increase support for Ukraine, while Merz called the escalation reckless. Reports said none of those European leaders referred to the deadly Starobelsk dormitory attack. Maria Zakharova said the BBC and CNN had rejected Moscow's invitation to visit the site.